Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday. Welcome to Tuesday. I don't think I have anything exciting to tell you right now.
Oh, the field trip.
Yes, I don't have anything new to tell you about that yet, but it is next Friday. Not this Friday, but the Friday after. So, but I've got to talk to people about that. Maybe I'll try and do that at the end of class when maybe more people are here. But some people who are virtually here. So Unadi is here. Good morning, Unadi. Jesse's here. Good morning, Jesse. Adon is here. Good morning, Adon. Zartaj is here. Good morning. And Harry's here. Good morning, Harry. Okay, so yesterday we were just finishing up talking about. We were just finishing talking about women's suffrage, right? Women fighting for the right to vote. And so I was trying to point out to you that, oppression is kind of a big thing, right? And it's not just one thing, and it's not one law, and it's not really just the behavior of a few people either, right? So oppression, we said, is kind of a society-wide thing. It's a way in which society works. And so I kind of walked you through ways in which this fight for women's right to vote, women's right to participate in politics, kind of fulfilled all of these things, right? The idea that, oppression is a historical thing, right? And so men, of course, have been in the dominant position in pretty much every culture on the planet for quite a while, right? And so the way in which society is built and the way in which the political arena is built privileges men, right? And so, again, we said even if we elected all women tomorrow in Canada, that might be great, but there would still be a lot to change, right? That wouldn't be, problem solved. Everybody kind of shakes hands and dusts off, says, okay, job well done. There's actually a lot more to do, right? Because as we saw, oppression is also ideological, right? So we have ideologies, we have big ideas that kind of support the way society is, and they usually advantage the dominant group, right? And again, the idea of meritocracy, the idea that, if you want to be successful, you just have to work hard, right? And people who do work hard are successful. That kind of idea privileges people with money, right? Because Donald Trump would definitely tell you that, right? Donald Trump would say, I worked hard for what I have, and I'm a self-made man, and, it's all because of me, blah, blah, blah. But again, Donald Trump comes from a wealthy, successful family, right? Donald Trump went to all the best schools because his parents could afford to send him there. Donald Trump inherited a I think, billion-dollar, well, no, at the time, multi-million-dollar company from his father, right? And he had lots of money to start out with to build his business. So, he may have worked hard, or maybe not, I don't know. Oh, good morning. He may have worked hard, or he may not have, but he started out in a really good spot, right? He started out way ahead of a lot of other people. And so he might say, oh, it's all due to his hard work. But it's not all due to his hard work, right? He had advantages that not everybody has, right? And so, again, I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but these ideologies in society kind of privilege the dominant group. They keep things the way they are. And again, they're very hard to push back against because they are everywhere, right? They are worked into every part of culture, right? Same thing with the idea that oppression is institutional, right? So the institutions in society, the military, the family, education, government, media, religion, all of these things kind of work. Well, all of these things are usually designed by and controlled by the dominant group. And so they tend to serve the interests of the dominant group better than they serve the interests of the minoritized group. And if a minoritized group wants to change something, they have to push back against all of those institutions, right? And so in the fight for women's suffrage, we saw that, women had to fight back against people in government, right? Because they needed them to give them the right to vote. but they also had to push back against medicine, right, and religion, and the criminal justice system. All of these things, and education, all of these things were kind of telling women that no, women don't need the right to vote, they're not capable, they're not competent, their job is in the home, not in the political sphere. And so all these institutions were kind of working against them, right? And women didn't really have control of any of them. And so they couldn't use those institutions to their benefit, right? And the last part was that oppression was cultural, right? So we have cultural ideas about, in this case, what men should be and what women should be. And women had to kind of push back and fight against that as well, because people had ideas about what women were supposed to be like, right? How women were supposed to behave. And they weren't supposed to be marching in the streets, right? They weren't supposed to be carrying signs. They weren't supposed to be interested in politics, right? They were supposed to be nice and respectful and quiet and, take care of the home and the family and listen to their husbands, and that's what they were supposed to do, right? So they had to kind of push back against these cultural ideas of what women should be and what women could and couldn't do, right? So women's right to vote was, yes, it was just changing a law, that's all it was, but it was connected to a lot more than that. And so any form of oppression is like this. Okay? Any form of oppression it's not just about not saying racist things, right? It's not just about changing one law. It's about having to push back against all of these things, right? And as you push back, trying to change them, right? Trying to change how institutions work. Trying to change what people's cultural ideas are, right? Trying to change what people believe in society, what their ideologies are. And that's not easy, right? Because we've seen that even though women are now able to participate in government, they can vote, they can be elected, they can be prime minister, right? And for a very short time, we actually had a female prime minister a number of years ago, Kim Campbell. But even though that's true, we still don't have very equal representation of women in government here. It's actually quite low, and it's below the level that the UN says, that women need to have sort of a meaningful voice. And so 100 years later, after this fight, and I think I have a slide on that. Oops, I'll get to it in a minute. 100 years after gaining the right to vote, we still don't have very good representation of women in government, right? And that's worth looking into, right? That's worth asking the question of why. Why are women not there? The other thing I mentioned yesterday is this is a good example of intersectionality, right? Intersectionality is the idea that there is more than one social identity operating at the same time, right? And an intersection is like in a street where two streets cross, that's an intersection. Here we have an intersection of gender and of race, right? So yes, these women's gender was the issue, right? They were being discriminated against because of their gender, but also there was a racial element here as well, because not all women gained the right to vote in 1916 or 17, whenever it was. Women of color, indigenous women, had to fight much, much longer, right? And so, again, there's a gender element here, but there's also a race element going on as well, right? And sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes you have situations and occurrences that multiple social identities are important, right? They're at play. And here, yeah, gender is an issue, but race is also an issue, right? And that's just what I was saying, is that women still do not have a meaningful voice in government here in Canada. And again, we're pretty far behind a lot of countries that I think most Canadians wouldn't think we would be behind on, right? Like, I think a lot of a lot of Canadians would look at countries like maybe Spain and Algeria and Afghanistan, before the Taliban, of course. Most Canadians would look at those countries and say, oh, there's no way that they have more women in government than we do. But they do, right? And so, again, that might be something for Canada to pay attention to, right? And again, I think yesterday you were looking at the list, Eunice, and Canada has moved up the list a bit. So that's good news. That's really good news. Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about yesterday is, again, pay attention to, it is about who controls social institutions, right? It's about who has power in society. It's not about numbers, right? It's not about majorities. It's about who controls powerful institutions. Because yeah, men are the minority here in Canada. There are less of us, not by that much, but there are less of us, and so it's not about numbers here. It's about power, right? Okay, so I wanted to just read. Did I want to read this? Do I want to read this or do I not want to read this? You know what? I think I'm going to skip it. I was going to ask you to read it, but I don't know that it adds anything specific to what we're going to do. Like, I don't think it adds anything to our conversation. So give me a second here. I'm just going to skip over it. I just want to see what slides I'm skipping over here. Would you like to read it?
I'm fine.
You're fine? Okay. Kind of thought you would be like, not eager to read something that you didn't really know about. Okay, 17. Okay, so I'm going to skip over that. So this is what we're kind of looking for, right? We're talking about, or we're looking for, gender equality, right? Equal rights, but also, hey Maria.
Hi.
Who are you looking for?
Peter.
Not here.
Thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, so we're talking about equal rights and equal opportunity for all genders, right? But again, it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be treated the same, right? And so I think I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it now. This is the difference between equality and equity, okay? So equality kind of means that everyone is the same or gets the same thing, right? And if you imagine that, okay, we're having a big test today. We're not. We're having a big test today, and it needs to be fair, it needs to be equal, so nobody can wear glasses. Nobody can wear glasses, right? Now, for a lot of people, that's going to be fine, right? They're going to say, whatever, I don't wear glasses, they do their test, right? But Eunice, are you going to have a difficult time?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Because you can't see it. So you're going to really struggle, right? Is that fair?
No.
No. Okay. Other way around. Everybody has to wear glasses during the exam. Okay? Is that fair?
No.
No, right? People are going to have these glasses on. They won't be able to see. They'll be getting headaches trying to write the... No, right? And so equality is not what we want so much as we want equity, right? So some people need support in order to have the same opportunities as others, right? And so, yeah, when you write your exam, if you need glasses, you wear them, right? That's a support that you need, and it puts you on a level playing field with everyone else, visually anyway, right? Same thing with, say, a wheelchair, right? We don't want to put everyone in wheelchairs. That doesn't make any sense, right? But we also don't want to deprive people of wheelchairs who need them, right? So if you need it, you use it, right? And that allows you to have kind of the same opportunity to move around as everyone else, right? And for people with physical disabilities like that, there's lots of evidence of that equity, right? ways in which, yeah, if you walk on your 2 feet, yeah, you can get on the bus, nice and easy, right? But if you're in a wheelchair, you can also get on the bus as well, right? You just need the ramp, right? So you get that extra support so that you have the same opportunities as other people. And so we're kind of talking about equity here, right? So not necessarily that we need to treat everyone the same, especially since men and women we're not exactly the same, right? But how do we support people so that everyone has similar opportunities, right? So that everyone, if they need a wheelchair or glasses or something else, that they have those things, right? Even though not everyone needs them. So how are we doing here with gender equality in Canada? Well, I would argue that it's not that great, right? We're certainly doing better than some places in the world, which is worth celebrating, right? But again, I gotta check out my stats here. We're in 35th place according to the global gender gap ratings. So again, I think this is kind of weird because I think most Canadians would feel that in terms of gender, Canada is a pretty equal country, right? And I think that would be the impression that we would give the world as well, right? Was that kind of your impression of Canada? Kind of gender equality or close to? Or no?
I didn't really look into the gender equality part, but I thought, yeah, it's equal.
Yeah.
I don't know much.
No, that's okay. But I mean, I think that's kind of the reputation that we might have, right? But again, some of the statistics don't lie here, okay? And I wanted to use this opportunity to actually talk about some statistics, right? Because I'll get to these things in a second, okay? Gender-based violence, sexual assault, gender wage gap, and other barriers that girls face. I'll get to that in a second. But one of the things we said at the very beginning of this course is that we need to let go of personal anecdotal evidence and look at broader social patterns, right? So we have to let go of the things that we maybe have experienced or haven't experienced and look at what's happening in society as a whole. Because again, none of us can really see the whole picture, right? We only have our own experience to draw from. And there's 36 million people in this country, right? So there's a lot of different experiences. How do we figure out what's happening in society as a whole, okay? And the way we do it is with statistics. And so I'm not going to bore you with too many statistics because this is not a math class. But there are a few things that we should pay attention to, right? Because we're exposed to a lot of numbers every day, right? In articles that we might read or YouTube videos, or people will tell us lots of percents and they'll show us bar graphs, and we have to know a little bit about how to interpret those, right? So I'm just going to show you some things that you may already know, and if you do know them, then fantastic. And if you don't, they'll be good to know, okay? So statistics, of course, is organizing and presenting usually numerical data, right? And again, that's how we can figure out what's going on in society, because the numbers will kind of tell us what's happening, right? So I want to talk about 3 things with you very quickly, okay? One has to do with sample size, one is over and under representation, and the third part is what data actually tells us, okay? So before I start, do you know anything about sample size?
Like a group of people that they not experiment, like they ask in order to get the data for the statistics, because they obviously can't ask the entire country, right? So they just ask like a whole group of people.
Right, yeah, so we often see sample size in surveys, right? So if we want to know how happy the country is with Justin Trudeau's leadership, we can't ask everybody, right? 36 million people, right? It'll take you years to ask every single person. So as Eunice says, yeah, you take a sample, right? And usually these samples are about 1,000 people, right? So they'll call up or they'll ask 1,000 people to give their opinion. What do they think of Justin Trudeau's leadership? And based on the sample size, they will expand that to the whole country, right? And so they might say that 42% of people are happy with Justin Trudeau, right? And again, that's probably not perfectly accurate for the entire country, but it's probably close, right? What do you think would happen if we didn't have time to ask 1,000 people, so we only asked 500 people? Still okay?
I guess.
Guess so? Okay, I don't have time to ask 500 people. I'm only going to ask 10.
I don't think so.
No good? Why? What's the problem?
If you're gonna like collect data like of world issues and stuff,
Yeah?
I think 10 people, so it's not too, it's not enough. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
The word that I think you're looking for is it's not representative, or it won't be representative,
Yeah.
right? It's too small. 36 million people and you're only going to ask 10? Too small, right? Now, let's say I was going to ask, let's say I wanted to know how many people are watching Squid Game, okay, in the college itself. Okay, so in Columbia College, how many people are watching Squid Game? Let's see. How many people do you think I would need to ask? There's about 2,000 students at Columbia College.
The entire floor, maybe?
The entire floor? So how many students might that be?
I'm not sure.
Take a guess. I don't know the answer. Depends on the day. If I had 2,000 students and I asked 100, do you think that would be okay?
No, maybe ask more.
Maybe more? 200?
300, 400?
300 or 400 out of 2,000? Wow. If I asked 200 students if here at Columbia College if they watch Squid Game, that would actually be a really good sample, right? Because that's 10%, right? That's 10% of my students. I would probably get a very accurate measure of how many people watch Squid Game, right? So if 60% of people said yes, 60% of the 200, I bet for the entire college, it would be close to that. Now, here's the other wrinkle I'll throw in here. What if I wanted to say, what if I wanted to know how many people at Columbia College eat fish? Very true, Harry. I want to know how many people at Columbia College eat fish. 2,000 students, how many people do you think I have to ask? Just like walk around the hallway with a platter of fish? Maybe.
Free fish.
Yeah, I don't know if I would eat free fish. I like fish, but I don't think I'd eat free fish. Especially if it was just lying around on a table.
Oh.
Just like this fish lying there. But so before, Eunice, you were saying about 200 people, right? And I said that'd be pretty good, right? For a sample universe of 2,000 people, a sample size of 200 is really good, right? That's a solid 10%. But there's kind of an issue with that, because it would depend on who I asked, because most of the students at Columbia College are from India, right? And we don't see them quite so much because most of them are still online. It's really the secondary program that is more in person. Most of our students are from India, and lots of those students are vegetarians, right? So is that gonna affect our?
Yep.
Yeah, right. So we have to actually be careful who we ask, because if we ask if I want to see how many people eat fish at the college, and then I think, okay, well, I'm just going to ask the secondary students because they're here and it's easier, I'm probably going to get a fairly high percentage, right? But it's probably not going to be accurate for the college because most of the people that I don't ask probably don't eat fish because most of them are vegetarians, right? So in that case, I would have to make sure I have balanced it out, right? If there's 70% of the students at this college are Indian students, I need to make sure that 70% of my sample are also Indian students, right? So that's 140. So in my 200 that we ask, I have to make sure I have about 140 Indian students in that pool. Otherwise, it's not going to be accurate.
We need to be sure, like, ask a variety of students, like, from every single country.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I might be able to, and we won't get into this because this is sampling theory, right? So there's like stratified sampling and stratified random, and there's all these different. We won't get into that, but yeah, I have to be careful about who I ask, right? And maybe I should check all the floors. You want me to close that?
Yeah, sure.
This number 2 or number 1 or both?
Number 2.
Number 2? Yeah, so I'd have to be careful. Oh, it's over there. I'd have to be careful that I asked enough Indian students because if I didn't, it would screw up my results, right? And I wouldn't get an accurate measure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, I'm going to do it too.
It's not like totally blackout. The sun is see-through. You can still see it.
Yeah, they have a gradient to them. They have a percentage of light they let through. Dunya, are you okay over there? Yeah. So yeah, our sample size matters, right? If it's too small, it's not representative, right? You can't ask 10 people when you're trying to figure out how the whole country thinks, right? And even if you have a big enough sample size, you have to make sure that you draw from people in a way that is representative of the whole, right? So again, if we have 70% Indian students here at Columbia College, we have to make sure that we ask about 70% of Indian students in our fish survey. Otherwise, the results are not going to be correct, right? So let me see. Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
So did that make sense? The sample size thing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The second thing I want to explain to you is over and under representation, because I've mentioned this a couple of times, but we haven't talked about it. So let's say we look at who might get an A in this class, okay? Now we're going to assume, let's assume that our class is roughly 50% guys and girls, okay? It's a perfect gender balance in this class. It might be actually, I'm not really sure if it is or not, but let's pretend it is. So if 4 people are going to get A's in this class, might we expect that 2 of those people will be guys and 2 girls? Possibly, right? Is it a big deal if 3 of the A's go to girls and only 1 A goes to a guy? Is that a big deal?
No.
Why not? Huh?
It depends.
It depends on what? Yes, but let's get to that in a second, right? So, but if I see that there are 4 A's in this class and 3 of the A's go to girls, should I be worried?
No.
Should I be concerned that something might be wrong?
No.
It could be, but probably not, right? The class is a really small group, right? And not everything is going to be perfectly 50-50, right? Because it's a small group, right? There's only 15 of us. Now, what if I went and I checked all the grades at Columbia College? Okay, I went into the computer, I ran a report of some type, and I looked at all of the grades for every student for an entire year. Okay? So we have 2,000 students. Maybe they're taking 3 courses a term, right? That's 6,000 courses. That's 6,000, yeah, that's 6,000 courses, 6,000 grades times 3 semesters. 18,000 grades. That's a lot, right? 18,000 grades. And let's say I look through all of the A's to see who's getting them, and I see that, wow, 3/4 of the A's are going to female students.
Is that 4,000 then?
Is that what?
4,500 then, over 6,000?
No, there's 18,000 grades,
Oh.
right? Because you're going to have 3 classes a term, and you're going to have 3 terms in a year. So you're going to have 9 grades for the year to look at. And so multiply that by 2,000 students, 18,000 grades in my little database.
Quarter is 1/4.
Yes. So if I look at all of those grades and I see that 75% of the A's are going to female students, should I be concerned?
Maybe.
Maybe, right? Something maybe is going on there, right? In this class, I shouldn't be worried, right? Because it's just too small of a sample, right? It's too small of a group. You know, sometimes it might be all girls getting A's, sometimes all guys, maybe it's half and half, but it's too small of a group, right? But if I look at the entire college for an entire year, I have 18,000 points of data in my spreadsheet. And if I see that 3/4 of the A's are going to female students, well, that might lead me to ask some questions, right? What questions might I ask if I discovered that?
It reminded me of the blue and the brown-eyed students.
Okay. It's how so? The blue and the brown-eyed students?
The brown-eyed was the teacher said that the brown-eyed students were smarter.
Yeah.
If 3/4 like of the grades, the good grades were like from female, I think there's.
The question should be like how many guys
Okay, definitely. But let's assume that it's a 50-50 gender split here at Columbia College.
oh then
That seems kind of weird, right? So many more A's going to female students. So Eunice is kind of like, I wonder what's going on, right? Is there some kind of social messaging bias going on here, right? Are teachers marking girls differently than boys?
Whoa.
Maybe, hopefully not, probably not. But we saw in the resume study, right, that people were calling back white resumes with white names more than resumes with black names. And again, they probably weren't doing that on purpose. So people can discriminate without knowing they're discriminating, right? So it's possible that instructors are marking female students differently from male students, right? It doesn't prove it, right? It's just possible, right? What else might explain this big difference in grades? Right? Could be instructors are biased, right? We're marking you differently based on your gender, and we're not aware of it.
Maybe who's more motivated to study and get good grades?
Right. There could be a motivation difference, right? There could be some social messaging, there could be cultural issues or pressure from parents. Maybe girls are either more motivated, more driven for whatever reason. Maybe they're getting more parental pressure.
maybe the guys are working full time
Yeah, maybe our male students are more likely to work longer hours than female students, right? So guys don't have as much time for their studies, and female students are succeeding more here in the college, right, in an academic sense. That's possible too. That's a good one, Dunya. Anything else? What else might be happening?
I can't think of it.
No. I think we probably could. Dunya, do you have another one that you can think of, or?
Just thinking of like back home in Kitchener,
Yeah.
it's like that all the time.
Yeah.
Like guys, they work full time and they study as well. But
Yep.
girls are always like
Yeah. So there could be a few things going on here, right? It could be things that are happening outside the college, right, with male students working more. It could be things that are happening kind of socially or culturally, right? Men might be expected to work more, or there might be more pressure on female students to do better in class, or there might just be less pressure on male students to do as good in class. There could be some bias going on in terms of how instructors are marking female and male students. It could be all of those things at the same time, right? And so, if I did that, if I calculated, if I figured out all the grades for an entire year and I saw that pattern, it's a little red flag, right? It's like, hey, something might be going on here. Have a look at this, right? But keep in mind the numbers don't explain what's going on, right? The numbers don't tell us which one of our explanations is right, or if any of them are right, or if all of them are right, right? We don't know why, but we do see the pattern, right? And the pattern is worth looking into because in theory, there's no reason why if we have 50% guys and 50% girls at this college, there's no reason why they shouldn't get the same number of A's, right? In theory, it should be equal, but it seems not to be, right? So something else is happening, right? And again, there might be something we're doing wrong, right? Like if we are in fact biased when we mark, we need to find a way to fix that, right? As instructors and as an institution, right? If it has to do with other things, maybe there are supports that male students need that we can provide them, right? Maybe we need to talk a little more about how education is important for young men and they need to take it seriously, even though they might want to work more right now and they might, feel good about working more and they might feel good about the money they're making. Maybe we can make a better case to them that education is important, right? Or maybe there's other things we can do. I don't know, right? But again, the numbers don't explain why it's happening. They just say what's happening, right? And they just say, hey, something's up, right? Something is not the way you think it should be. And again, maybe nothing is wrong here, or maybe it is. But the numbers kind of tell us that we need to look into it, right? Again, if we do it in this class, though, it doesn't mean anything, right? The group is too small, the numbers are too small. They could be anywhere, right? But with 18,000 grades over an entire year, if we saw that pattern, I think something might be up, right? We should look at that and figure out what's going on. Sorry, I've got some text on that, but we've talked about that. The last one is paying attention to what numbers and data actually say. Because sometimes when people throw statistics at us, we kind of, we're not too critical of them, right? And we should be. So here, I have an example. So if we take a survey and we find that 70% of people believe in ghosts, that doesn't mean that ghosts exist, right? That just means that 70% of people believe in them, right? So just because some people tell us that something is true, it doesn't make it true, right? It just means that that's what people believe. And so we have to kind of pay attention to what the numbers are actually telling us, right? And make sure that we're not thinking that they prove something that they really don't, okay? And again, if we go back to our last example with female students getting more A's, does that prove that female students are smarter than male students? No, right? Maybe, right? That might be the answer to that question, but it's probably not, right? And it definitely doesn't prove any of the suggestions that we made, right? About men working more, women working less, women maybe taking their studies seriously, bias in marking. It doesn't prove any of those things, right? It just says that something's happening, right? And here, again, doesn't matter how many people believe in ghosts. It doesn't mean that doesn't make them real, right? Yeah, and also pay attention to numbers in context. And this is again similar to the college example, but if you look at the number of people murdered in Canada, in 2016 there were 600 people murdered in Canada in 1 year, which sounds like a lot of people. But when you look at the United States, you'll see that 17,000 people
Whoa.
were killed in a single year, right? That sounds like a lot. But there's also a lot more Americans than there are Canadians. So is the US a more dangerous country or is Canada? Hard to tell from those numbers, right? So we have to give it a common denominator, right? Just like in math.
Because the population is different anywhere.
Yeah, Canada's got about 36 million people. The US, I think, has about 323 million people. So totally different sizes of countries, right? So yeah, we need to give them a common denominator, right? We need to put it out of 100,000 people, which is commonly what they do. And there you can see that, yes, the US is a more dangerous place, right? Their murder rate for the year is 5.3 for every 100,000. Here in Canada, it's only 1.68, right? So you are far less likely to be murdered here in Canada than in the United States, right? But again, if you just look at the numbers, the 600 and the 17,000, it is hard to tell, right? Because yeah, 17,000 is much bigger, but the US is also a much bigger country, right? And so unless you make those two numbers comparable, right? Unless you give them a common denominator, you're not really sure what you're looking at, right? 600 people being murdered in a year is a lot. 17,000 is also a lot. But which one is worse, right? Which country is more dangerous? You need to be able to compare them equally, right? Okay. Yeah, so the last thing I'll say before we have a break here is, again, pay attention to any assumptions you might make about data, right? So often data just tell us what's happening, they don't tell us why, right? So with the A's, with the example of A's at the college, with the ghosts, and even with the explanation of them, or the statistics on the murders, all that tells us is that more people are being murdered in the US than in Canada. Doesn't tell us why, right? Doesn't tell us that it's because gun laws are far more relaxed in the US than Canada. It doesn't say that, doesn't prove it. Doesn't prove that the Americans are much more violent than the Canadians. It doesn't prove any of that, right? It just tells us what is, right? And then we have to explain why, okay? So numbers usually say what, but then we have to figure out the why, okay? Okay, so that's about all the statistics that I would like to tell you, and I suspect it's probably all the statistics that you want to hear about. So let's take a little break, and when we come back, we'll finish off sexism, okay? Okay. Okay, and we are officially back. Oh, the sun went away.
Yes.
I thought the sun was coming up, and now it's
The sun makes me sleepy.
gone. But it's beautiful and warm. The sun. It's our friend, Eunice. The sun is our friend. No. Okay, Dunya, you ready to go? You're what? You're ready? Okay, here we go. So let's kind of tie this up here. Oh yeah, I got to do that first. So I wanted to talk just very quickly about some of the ways in which we see sexism playing out in kind of greater society, right? Because again, sometimes it's in media, right? We've seen how sexism is in media, we've seen it in advertising, but let's look at it in society as a whole and how we can kind of see those things, okay? So here in Canada, and of course in many other societies around the world, girls and women are at a higher risk of gender-based violence, right? So there's a lot of numbers here, and maybe I won't talk about them all, or maybe I won't, or maybe I will. But look at this first one. Half of all women in Canada have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16, right? Half. That's a big number, right? If you think about, there's 36 million people in Canada, roughly half of those are women, so that's about 18 million women, and 9 million of them have experienced at least one incident of physical or sexual violence since the age of 16. 9 million women. And that's at least one, right? Never mind situations where they're repeatedly subjected to that abuse, right? That's a big number, right? 67% of Canadians say they have personally known at least one woman who has experienced physical or sexual abuse, right? 67%.
Is abuse and assault
There's kind of overlap. For our purposes, we could probably use either term. Right? I think usually abuse has to do with. Usually they'll use abuse when the person, I think, is known to the other person, and then it's abuse. So if someone is sexually assaulted by someone they don't know, then it's assault. If it's someone that you do know, it's sometimes abuse, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if that's correct. That's a big number, is it not? 67%. And keep in mind that many people, but also many women, who experience physical or sexual abuse don't tell anyone about it, right?
every 6 days?
Yeah, every 6 days a woman in Canada is killed by her intimate partner. Yeah. So yeah, if this is the other thing, is that, especially when we look at horror movies or thrillers, people are always being killed by random serial killers, right? But the numbers don't suggest that, right? If you're going to be killed, it's much more likely you're going to be killed by your boyfriend or your husband.
Or it's like someone you know.
Yeah, right? The odds of you being killed by just some random weirdo, tiny, right? And so that's pretty concerning. And sorry, I'm going to jump back to point number 2 there. Because many people don't report their physical or sexual abuse, that number's higher, right? More than 67% of Canadians know someone who has suffered physical or sexual abuse. They just don't know because that person hasn't told them.
Some keep quiet, right?
Yeah.
Because they're afraid.
Yeah. So 67% is the low number, right? What is it for real? Is it 70, 80, 85, 90, right? That's a big problem, right? Yeah, on any given night, shelters have 3,400 women and 2,700 kids in their shelter because it's not safe at home, right? Because their partner is drunk or high or violent or all three of those things, right? And so they have to stay in a safe place. Women's self-reported 500,000 sexual assaults in 2014, according to Statistics Canada. Women are 10 times more likely than men to be victims of police-reported sexual assault. Right? So if a sexual assault happens, it is almost certainly happening to a woman, not to a man, although there's some bias in there as well because men are very unlikely to report being sexually assaulted by anyone, especially if it's another man that sexually assaults them.
Oh.
They're very unlikely to report it. But yeah, that's 500,000 sexual assaults, right? And keep in mind, like we said, many women don't report those sexual assaults, right? They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to relive it. They just want to forget it. They're worried that if they report it to the police, that the person who assaulted them will hurt them. They're worried about being ashamed, right? They think maybe they did something wrong. And so that's a low number too, right? 500,000 is a big number, but it's less, right? There are more than that. Guaranteed there are more than that. Yeah, and here you can see both men and women experience sexual assault, but women account for 92% of the victims, right? So again, that's an overrepresentation, right? There's 50% of women in Canada. If all things were equal, you would say that 50% of sexual assaults happen to women, 50% happen to men, right? But that's not the reality, right? It is almost exclusively women, right? 92%. Sexual assault's the only violent crime in Canada that is not going down, right? So every year we have fewer murders, fewer assaults, right? Fewer incidences of violence, except for sexual assault. Sexual assaults are not going down.
Is sexual assault like they touch you without permission and they
It can go anywhere from touching without permission all the way to rape. So anywhere in there counts. Yeah. So these crimes are not actually going down, and here you can see between 2009 and 13, the rate of sexual assault of women by their intimate partners went up almost 20%, right? So again, people in relationships with other people are not safe, right? And often we think about physical assault or sexual assault or murder or violence as something that happens from people you don't know, right? Some weirdo jumps out of the bushes, right? And again, sometimes that happens and it's very dangerous and it's very scary, but it's also worth paying attention to that a lot of sexual assault and violence happens within relationships, right? With people who are supposed to care about you and to take care of you, right? And that's not happening, right? This is also often a problem for young people. So here, the rate of sexual assault for Canadians aged 15 to 24 is 18 times higher than people above 55, right? So young people are far more likely to be sexually assaulted, and they're far more likely to be women, right? So this is a thing that affects young women, or this is a thing that affects young people, and it mostly affects young women. Right? Girls are 4 times more likely to be sexually abused by a family member than a boy, right? And again, that's awful to think about, but it's much more likely to happen to girls than to boys, right? Sexual assaults account for 33% of all crimes committed against Aboriginal women. Only 10% of crimes committed against non-Aboriginal women, right? So Aboriginal women or Indigenous women are much more likely to suffer sexual abuse, sexual assault, or rape as compared to non-Aboriginal or non-Indigenous Canadians, right? Women with disabilities experience sexual violence at 3 times the rate of non-disabled women, right? So you can see how again there's some intersectionality here, right? This is an issue, sexual violence and sexual harassment is an issue for women, but if you are a woman of color, if you are an Indigenous woman, if you are a disabled woman, you are even more vulnerable, right? You are more likely to be a victim of sexual assault, sexual violence than other women, right? There's some other things too. If you look at the, mental health is something that we're talking about a lot these days in schools and kind of out in society. And you'll see here that, as young girls kind of progress through school, their confidence in themselves, their self-confidence declines, right? Here in grade 6, 36% of girls feel self-confident, right? Which is actually not that great anyway, right? I feel like we would want a higher percentage of girls that feel self-confident. But in grade 6, it's really only 1 in 3. But by the time you get to grade 10, it's less, right? It's only 14%. 85% of girls in grade 10 don't feel confident in themselves, right? Don't feel comfortable with themselves. Between 9 and 13, these girls who became less confident are much more likely to be depressed, right? We have women far more likely to suffer anxiety and depression starting all the way at age 9. Right? That's a big problem, right? Like a 9-year-old girl with depression, that's heartbreaking, right? And that's a big problem.
But sometimes I think they don't realize that they have depression. Like,
Yeah.
not all people are allowed to or can afford to go to see a psychiatrist and get like diagnosed that they have depression. Some are just like the obvious.
Yeah, there's lots of issues there, right? So children, never mind girls, but children, yeah, they don't have the self-awareness to know that they don't feel right. They don't feel normal, right? Because they don't know enough to know when they're not feeling right? And yeah, some families don't have resources to send their kids to therapists, right? Sometimes there's medication involved that they may or may not be able to afford. Some people don't like to talk about those things, right? Or there's sort of cultural shame around mental health issues, and so they may not get help for that either. So yeah, these are kind of heartbreaking numbers, but they're also made worse by economic inequalities. Sometimes they're made worse by cultural or religious ideas that say that, that mental health isn't, a thing that should be worried about, or depression isn't real, or, if someone has a mental health issue, that it's somehow shameful or weak, or it reflects badly on the parents, or whatever it is. And, all of these things are just not true, right? Sometimes people need to talk to someone, right, to work things out. But I think it is a little scary that it's happening so young, right? And that it's happening for the most part, that it's happening to young girls, right? And again, just like with the grades, this is a good place for us to ask why, right? So the numbers don't tell us the numbers tell us what is happening, but they don't tell us why, right? And the question is why? Why are girls struggling with their mental health more than boys, right? Why are they much more likely to feel not confident? Why are they much more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety, right? Why are they much more likely to be hospitalized for mental disorders, right? Much more so than boys. Why are girls much more likely to have an eating disorder than men, right? More than half of the female patients hospitalized for eating disorders in Canada are girls aged 10 to 19, right? So again, this is a problem of women, but it's also of young women, right? Suicide remains the third leading cause of death for girls aged 10 to 14. The second leading cause of death for girls aged 15 to 19, right? So the most dangerous thing for many of these young girls is suicide, is themselves, right? And is their mental health, right? And that's scary and heartbreaking, right? And again, it should lead us to ask the question why, right? Why are so many young people suffering with these mental health issues? And specifically, why are girls much more vulnerable? Well, maybe I'll ask you that. What do you think? Why are girls much more likely to suffer mental health issues than boys?
Maybe female tend to be more sensitive
Mm-hmm.
about like that. I'm not trying to stereotype,
No, it's okay.
but I think female are more like sensitive, like they tend to overthink more.
Okay, so there's the idea that women might be more sensitive and might have a tendency to overthink things more. Okay.
And maybe they're more like aware of their figure. So if someone bullies them and stuff, like they're what's that mentality? Like they can't like handle being
Well, yeah.
verbally abused.
Well, we've said, I think we've said a few times that, here in at least Western society anyway, there's a lot more focus on women's appearance than men, right? Women are expected to look a certain way in terms of hair and makeup and fashion. Their bodies are expected to conform to certain dimensions, right? And that kind of pressure is difficult, right? That kind of constant worry about being judged by how you look, right? Especially if you're someone who doesn't kind of fit into what society deems as beautiful, right? Society has a pretty narrow view of what's hot and what's not. But the problem is that most regular people don't fit perfectly into that kind of stereotype, right? Nobody looks like Barbie, right? And yet that is the ideal, right? That's the model we're holding up as, this is the ideal woman, but nobody looks like that, right? And so again, women are women are more likely to be conscious about their conscious about their appearance. Kayla suggests maybe hormones, right, which make women stress. There are, this is a tricky one, I think, because, women have hormones, right? Right? Women have hormones. Men have them too, though, right? And so sometimes the hormones are actually a legitimate thing, right, that affect women's bodies and sort of mental and emotional states. But it's the same thing for men, right? And so I think you're right, Kayla, but it's tricky because there are so many kind of negative stereotypes around women and hormones, particularly as it pertains to women's menstrual cycle. And so, we can talk about that, or we could talk about that, but it's such a stereotype that it's like it feels dangerous to talk about.
Yeah.
Because so many men are like, oh, it's that time of the month, and they roll their eyes, and that's sexist and stupid, but also it's a real oversimplification of what's happening, right? So I think you're probably, there's probably something there, Kayla, but also I'm hesitant to talk about it because it's such a such a negative stereotype thing that it's
Sort of a sensitive topic.
it can be, yeah. And again, there's some truth to that, but it's a little tricky to discuss. So Taj says there's an infertility thing, right? And this is worth saying too, not for young women, but for women who want to get pregnant or are trying to get pregnant and maybe they're not able to. That can be really difficult as well, right? Because part of women's identity in society is about being able to have babies, right? To be mothers. And for those women who really want that and can't seem to get pregnant, that can be really stressful and really upsetting, right? And it's probably not something that you're dealing with at this stage of your life, right? People are probably, if anything, people are probably telling you to,
Not get
don't get pregnant under any circumstances. But then, the flip side of that is that there are women in their, 20s and 30s who really want to get pregnant and yet struggle to. And that can be really difficult as well, right? And it's something that men generally don't worry about too much, right? Or don't have to worry about too much. Sometimes they do. I hope that's what you meant, Sartaj. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but I thought that's what it was. Yeah, so we could talk about this a little more, but maybe I'll just try to wrap it up because we've got 5 minutes left here. So again, what we've seen in this unit, I think, is that Western societies have a pretty significant inequality between men and women. And I think most societies, if not all societies around the world, have this inequality, right? Sometimes it's a big gap, sometimes it's a smaller gap, but really there's no society on earth that is gender equal, and really there's no society on earth in which women are the ones with the social power, right? They're not the dominant group. We looked at how sexism shows up in movies and television and advertising. It is kind of all around us, and it is kind of everywhere. And sometimes it's tricky to identify because it's so stereotypical, right? We're so used to it, and there is elements of truth, right? That men and women are a little bit different, right? And we do have different experiences, but it's very easy to mistake some of those biological differences for gender roles, right? The things that we make up, right? The things that we say that men and women should and shouldn't be like. And some of those things come all the way back from when we switched to agriculture, right? 10 or 12,000 years ago, right? And we talked about Christopher Ryan, and we talked about inheritance and property transfer and things like that. And so, it's kind of, there's a lot of weight of history here, right? And, men and women are not equal within society currently. And we probably haven't been for a very, very long time. And again, here in the West, we have done some good things, right? That, women have regained a lot of equality that was lost early on. But we're still not there, right? In a lot of different ways. We've still got a long way to go. And I think that was the message in the documentary we watched with the 4 young women, right? Really, no matter where they came from in the world, they all had some similar and some different, but they all had the idea that, we're not there yet, right? I don't feel like I have as much power or choice or freedom as boys my age do, right? And again, I don't know, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's what we want. But, it seems to be an ongoing struggle of how to create that equality, right? So maybe I'll leave it there, unless, is there anything else that you two want to say or ask about, or? I will. I'm going to try to get it marked tonight so we can review it tomorrow. No. What's that? Never mind. You okay? Okay. Oh, okay. So Taj was saying inferiority complex. Yeah, I guess. Sorry, that's a good one too, Zartaj. But I would probably restate that as internalized oppression. I think that's what we would want to. That's what we would want to say, right? Is that, when women get absorb these social messages about being less than, and then they feel them, right? Or they feel that there is a standard that they should live up to that they can't, right? And so, sorry if I misread you. Well, I did misread you, but yeah, I agree with you, but I would probably call that internalized oppression. And Harry here says, women just have it tougher in general compared to men. I mean, both genders have their challenges, but where women's problems are prevalent, it's really bad for them. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, we all have difficulties in life, right? We all have struggles, but inequality makes it worse. Hi, Felicia. You can come in. Yeah, inequalities make it worse, right? Okay. So thank you, everyone. That's all I have for you. Come back tomorrow. We will begin racism. Okay?
Yep.
So have a nice afternoon, and I will see you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.